My fiancé said I couldn't keep up with his intelligence after 6 years, so I terminated his $600 million contract. The champagne flutes clinked around me as Bill raised his glass to the crowd of investors filling the ballroom. To the $600 million government contract, he announced, his voice carrying that confident tone I once found attractive. Then he turned to me with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. Though I have to admit, the technical details are probably over Sophia's head. She can't quite keep up intellectually with this level of complexity. She's beautiful, but beauty fades, intelligence doesn't. Laughter rippled through the room. Polite, knowing laughter from men in expensive suits who nodded as if Bill had made some charming observation about his adorable but limited fiancé. My cheeks burned, but I kept my smile perfectly frozen, my champagne glass steady in my hand. My name is Sophia Lynn. I'm 34 years old. And the algorithm powering that $600 million contract? I wrote every line of it. The prototype that secured Bill's first investors? I coded it during sleepless nights while he practiced his pitch. The distributed processing system that made his company viable? Mine. But these investors didn't know that. They saw what Bill wanted them to see, a supportive girlfriend who smiled prettily at events she couldn't possibly understand. I took a slow sip of champagne and made a decision. Something had to change. Tonight. The limousine's leather seats felt cold against my bare shoulders as we drove home through San Francisco's glittering streets. Bill scrolled through his phone, already composing tweets about his triumph. I stared out the tinted window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and white. You're being overly sensitive, Bill said finally, not bothering to look up from his screen. It was just a joke, Sophia. Everyone understood it was harmless. I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? That his joke had erased 6 years of my contributions in a single sentence? That I'd felt myself disappear in that ballroom full of strangers? This is exactly what I mean, he continued, his voice taking on that irritated edge I'd heard more frequently lately. You're too emotional for high-level business discussions. Investors want confidence and swagger, not hurt feelings and wounded pride. He finally glanced at me, his expression mixing annoyance with something worse, pity. You're brilliant in your own way, Sophia. But there's a reason I handle the business side and investor relations. You're simply too sentimental for these high-stakes situations. I turned back to the window, but this time I wasn't seeing the city. I was seeing clearly for the first time in years. My sentimentality, as he called it, had just died. What replaced it was cold, focused resolve. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I lay beside Bill, listening to his satisfied breathing, and let myself remember how we'd started. 6 years ago, I'd been running my own startup, a small but promising AI consulting firm with 3 clients and genuine potential. Then I met Bill Hart at a tech conference in Austin. He'd been magnetic. Charming, ambitious, bursting with ideas but lacking the technical expertise to execute them. Partner with me, he'd said over coffee that stretched into dinner, then drinks that lasted until midnight. Your technical genius, my business vision. Together, we'll build something revolutionary. So I'd closed my startup. I'd become his technical co-founder in everything but title. I'd coded his prototypes, debugged his demonstrations at 3 a.m. before crucial investor meetings, solved impossible problems while he took the stage to present our solutions as his innovations. Every success Bill celebrated had my fingerprints hidden beneath his name. The distributed processing system that made his company viable? Mine. The security protocols that landed the defense contract? Mine. The efficiency algorithms that tripled productivity? All mine. But somewhere along the way, we had become he, and I'd allowed it. I'd told myself that love meant support, that partnerships didn't require equal credit, that my turn would come. Looking back now, I realized I'd been slowly erasing myself. 2 weeks after the gala, I woke at midnight to find Bill's side of the bed empty. I heard his voice drifting from his study, low, amused, relaxed. Something made me slip out of bed and move silently down the hallway, my bare feet soundless on the hardwood. Honestly, Marcus, I keep her around mainly for appearances, Bill was saying, his tone casual, almost bored. Investors like seeing a stable relationship. Makes me seem grounded, you know? Less of a risk. But intellectually? She's basically just an accessory with a pretty face. I froze outside the door, my hand pressed against the wall for support. No, seriously, he continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice. She thinks she contributed to the technical side, but between you and me, I had to completely rebuild all her messy code before any of it was actually usable. She's competent enough for basic tasks, but the real innovation? That's all me. My breath caught in my throat. Trust me, Bill laughed, once this defense contract is fully secured and deployed, I'll find a graceful exit strategy. Can't have dead weight holding back the company's future growth, right? Ava's already hinted she'd be interested in something more serious. I walked back to our bedroom on numb legs. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. Instead, I lay in the darkness and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The love, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it crystallized into something harder, cleaner, more dangerous. Purpose. I started watching him differently. Not emotionally, not as a betrayed lover, but with the same methodical precision I applied to debugging complex code. I observed Bill's patterns, his meetings, his careless arrogance, the way he never questioned what I did on my laptop during evenings he assumed I spent browsing social media. I was actually reviewing his company's financial filings. As someone who'd helped build the technical infrastructure from the ground up, I still had access to systems Bill had forgotten I could reach. Not the current operational systems, I wasn't foolish enough to leave obvious trails, but the archived development repositories, the historical file structures, the digital paper trail of how everything had been built. What I discovered made my careful observation sharpen into focused investigation. Tax irregularities. Revenue attributed to projects I'd personally completed but credited to Bill's leadership. Non-disclosure agreements signed by contractors who'd worked under my direct supervision but acknowledged only Bill's guidance. Then I found the hidden folder buried 3 levels deep in our shared network drive. Project Titan. A defense application I'd never heard Bill mention, secured with password protection he thought was sophisticated. I cracked it in 4 minutes. Inside were files that made my hands shake with cold fury. It was my algorithm. The distributed processing system I'd developed 3 years ago, before I'd even met Bill. He'd somehow accessed my old research files and integrated my code into the core of his $600 million defense contract. And he'd filed the patent under his name alone. The emails confirmed everything. I found them in Bill's archived correspondence, carelessly unsecured because he'd never imagined I'd look, never believed I was capable of the strategic thinking required to investigate him. Messages to his patent attorney from 18 months ago, regarding the distributed processing algorithm, I need this filed as proprietary company technology developed under my direction. Make sure there's no paper trail back to Sophia's earlier research. The core architecture is similar to her old university work, but I've made significant improvements. As far as documentation is concerned, I developed this independently. The improvements he referenced? Minor optimizations I'd casually suggested during dinner conversations about his projects, never imagining he was taking notes. Not to credit me, but to obscure my authorship and strengthen his claim to independent development. Another email, this one more recent. The defense contract is contingent on verified IP ownership. Ensure all documentation shows me as sole inventor. Sophia's name shouldn't appear anywhere in the patent filing or supporting materials. I sat in our home office, surrounded by the digital evidence of Bill's betrayal, and felt oddly calm. The hurt had burned away, leaving behind something more useful, clarity. This wasn't about love or loyalty anymore. This was intellectual property theft. Calculated, deliberate, systematic theft of my work, my career, my identity. I opened a new encrypted folder on my personal laptop and began methodically copying everything. Every email, every file timestamp, every piece of evidence. This was war now, and I intended to win. The next 3 weeks passed in careful performance art. I smiled at company events. I held Bill's hand for photographs with investors. I played the role of supportive fiancé while systematically building an unbreakable legal case behind the scenes. Every night after Bill fell asleep, I worked. I compiled timestamped versions of my original code from university archives. I gathered email exchanges where I'd patiently explained technical concepts to Bill, breaking down complex algorithms into language he could understand and present to investors. I documented every instance where I'd solved critical problems he'd later claimed credit for solving. I reached out to former colleagues from my old startup, people who'd worked with me before Bill existed in my life. They remembered my distributed processing research. They had dated correspondence, old project files, archived emails discussing my algorithm's development. They offered to provide sworn statements if needed. I consulted with intellectual property attorneys through encrypted communications, never using Bill's network or devices. I learned about patent law, prior art, proof of authorship. I discovered that my obsessive documentation habits, the same traits Bill had mocked as neurotic, now formed an unbreakable chain of evidence. Outwardly, nothing changed. I attended dinners, laughed at appropriate moments, played my assigned role perfectly. Bill never suspected that his overly emotional, intellectually inferior fiancé was systematically constructing the architecture of his complete destruction. He'd always underestimated me. Now that underestimation would cost him everything he'd stolen. Nora arrived at the coffee shop looking nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting to see Bill's spies everywhere. We'd been friends since college, long before she'd become PR director at Bill's company. She ordered chamomile tea with trembling hands. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she said quietly, leaning across the small table. "But you deserve to know before everyone else does. Bill's having an affair." I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my pulse quickened. "With who?" "Ava Martinez. His head of marketing." Nora pulled out her phone, showing me photos from a company retreat I hadn't attended. Bill and Ava standing too close, sharing looks that spoke of intimacy, touching each other with casual familiarity. "It's been going on for at least 5 months, Sophia." "Probably longer." She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "There's more. He's planning to propose to her publicly. At next month's investor retreat in Miami. He's already commissioned the ring. I saw the jeweler's invoice by accident. He's going to announce ending your engagement and beginning with her in the same breath, spinning it as a bold new chapter for both his personal life and the company." The cruelty was almost impressive in its calculation. Not just replacing me, but orchestrating my public humiliation as a corporate branding exercise. "I'm so sorry," Nora whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was terrified of losing my job. But this crossed a line. You don't deserve this treatment." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for telling me." Inside, I was calculating. 1 month. I had exactly 1 month. Dr. Rivera's office at Stanford looked exactly as I remembered from 5 years ago, the same overflowing bookshelves, the same awards lining the walls, the same slightly cluttered desk that somehow contained perfect order beneath apparent chaos. My former thesis advisor studied the documents I'd spread before him with sharp, analytical eyes. "This is your algorithm," he said finally. "Not a question. A statement of fact. I remember when you first developed this approach. You presented it at the Graduate Research Symposium in your final year. It was genuinely innovative work. Do you still have any documentation from that time?" I asked, trying to keep the hope from my voice. "Dr. Rivera turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I maintain comprehensive archives of all my doctoral students' significant research. It saved more than one patent dispute over the years. He pulled up a folder dated 7 years ago, before Bill Hart had even existed in my world. Here. Your original code, your presentation slides, my detailed feedback notes, peer review comments. All timestamped and university archived in multiple redundant systems. Relief flooded through me like warm water. Would you be willing to provide expert testimony if this goes to court? I asked. His expression hardened with academic outrage. Absolutely. Intellectual theft is unconscionable under any circumstances, but stealing a former student's doctoral research and profiting to this degree? That's a betrayal of everything academia stands for. He paused, studying me. You should have been famous for this work, Sophia. Instead, you let someone else claim your innovation. I know, I said quietly. But I'm correcting that mistake now. The investor dinner took place at Zephyr, an exclusive restaurant where reservations required 6 months' notice and conversations routinely determined the fate of billion-dollar companies. I wore the emerald silk dress Bill had selected, playing the part he'd carefully assigned me. Around the table, venture capitalists and defense industry executives discussed quarterly projections and market positioning. Bill held court at the head, gesturing expansively about future applications of his revolutionary technology. I noticed Ava seated strategically near the middle, dressed to impress, catching Bill's eye with practiced subtlety. The real innovation here, Bill explained to a gray-haired investor from Boston, is the distributed processing architecture. It allows for unprecedented computational efficiency in real-time data analysis across multiple secure networks simultaneously. Those exact words. My words from my thesis defense presentation, now flowing from Bill's mouth as if he'd conceived them himself, as if the years of research had been his intellectual journey. He turned to me with that patronizing smile I'd once found endearing. Though I'm sure all these technical details are boring you to tears, darling. More wine. The investor interjected before I could respond. Doesn't your fiancé work in technology? Surely she finds this fascinating. Bill laughed, the sound easy and dismissive. Sophia dabbles in tech, but she's more of an emotional support partner than a technical contributor. Right, sweetheart? You've always preferred the human side of business over the computational complexities. I set down my wine glass with deliberate precision, meeting his eyes steadily. You're absolutely right, Bill. Emotions have nothing to do with business. Something in my tone made his smile falter fractionally. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face for something he couldn't quite identify. But he recovered quickly, turning back to his audience of investors and admirers. Across the table, Ava watched me with calculating interest. I smiled at her pleasantly, warmly even. Neither of them saw what was coming. That night, alone in the guest bedroom I'd claimed weeks ago under the excuse that Bill's snoring disturbed my sleep, I finally allowed myself to break. The tears came in harsh, silent waves that shook my entire body, muffled against my pillow so Bill wouldn't hear from the master suite down the hall. 6 years. 6 years of my life poured into building someone else's dream while my own withered and died. I'd loved him genuinely, completely, with the kind of trust that feels like security until the moment it's revealed as profound naivety. I'd believed in us, in our partnership, in the future we were supposedly building together. Every sacrifice had felt meaningful because I thought we shared the same vision, the same goals, the same fundamental values. But Bill had seen me as a resource to be exploited and discarded. My code to steal, my expertise to drain, my loyalty to manipulate until it was no longer useful. And when my utility expired, he planned to dispose of me publicly, spectacularly, adding deliberate humiliation to intellectual theft. I cried for the woman I'd been, the one who'd trusted so completely that she'd abandoned her own dreams. I mourned the future I'd imagined, the partnership that had only ever existed in my delusional optimism. But as the tears finally subsided, something harder and clearer crystallized in their place. I thought about my algorithm celebrating its success. I thought about the $600 million contract built on my stolen work. I thought about Ava's engagement ring, designed and purchased while I still wore his first proposal's diamond. I whispered into the darkness, my voice steady now, he'll never see it coming. Then I dried my face, opened my laptop, and continued building the architecture of Bill's destruction. Golden Gate Park was nearly empty on the Tuesday morning when I met Nora on a bench overlooking the bay. We'd chosen this location specifically, far from Bill's office, from security cameras, from anyone who might recognize us and report back. I explained what I'd discovered. The stolen algorithm, the fraudulent patent filing, the systematic erasure of my contributions. I showed her the evidence I'd compiled, the unbreakable chain of documentation proving my authorship. I want to do this right, I told her carefully. Not revenge, but justice. Legal, ethical, by the book. But I need help from people inside the company who understand what Bill's really done. Nora listened with growing anger, her expression shifting from shock to outrage to fierce determination. I'm in, she said without hesitation. I've watched Bill take credit for other people's work for years. I told myself that was just standard corporate politics, that everyone did it. But this is different. This is outright theft on a massive scale. There's someone else I need, I said. Liam Chin. The CFO. Nora's eyebrows rose sharply. Liam's Bill's most trusted advisor. You think he'll turn? Liam's loyalty is to corporate integrity, not blind obedience, I replied. I've seen him push back on ethical issues before. And I have evidence that Bill's been concealing financial irregularities from him, discrepancies in how revenue gets attributed, questionable expense categorizations. Liam won't tolerate fraud. It took 3 carefully planned conversations, but when Nora finally presented Liam with evidence of the financial manipulations, his response was immediate and furious. He agreed to meet with us. If Bill's committed fraud, Liam said at that first clandestine meeting, his jaw tight with anger, he needs to face consequences. My job is protecting this company's integrity, not enabling criminal behavior. We formed an unlikely alliance that day, the betrayed fiancé, the disillusioned PR director, and the principled CFO, united against the empire built on lies. I called Bill's office number from my personal phone, making sure my voice carried just the right note of anxious uncertainty. Bill, I'm sorry to bother you during work, but I just saw something concerning in the news. There's an article about increased scrutiny on government defense contractors. Something about enhanced IP verification requirements for contracts over $500 million? I could hear him typing, probably searching for what I'd referenced. What are you talking about? Send me the link. I probably misunderstood it, I said quickly, playing the role he expected. You know, I don't really follow these regulatory things very well. But the article mentioned compliance audits and patent verification processes. I just wanted to make sure everything with your contract was properly documented and filed correctly. His voice took on that familiar irritated tone. Of course everything's properly filed, Sophia. Stop worrying about things you don't understand. The legal team handles all compliance matters. This is exactly what I mean about you getting anxious over business issues outside your expertise. You're absolutely right, I agreed meekly. I'm sure it's nothing. Sorry for bothering you. After disconnecting, I sat back with quiet satisfaction. The seed was planted perfectly. In exactly 4 days, when the actual compliance audit notification arrived, submitted anonymously through proper government channels with meticulously documented concerns about IP ownership irregularities. Bill would remember this conversation. He'd assume I'd simply misread some industry article and gotten confused about routine procedures. He'd never suspect I'd engineered the entire audit myself. That I'd spent 3 weeks researching the exact regulations governing defense contracts. That I'd submitted a carefully crafted complaint with substantial evidence of potential IP violations to the appropriate federal oversight committee. The first domino stood ready, waiting for the gentlest push to begin its devastating cascade. The official notification arrived on a Wednesday morning via encrypted federal email. I watched Bill read it over breakfast, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, color draining from his face as he absorbed the formal language. What's wrong? I asked with perfect innocent concern. Nothing. Just bureaucratic complications. But his hands trembled slightly as he forwarded the message to his legal team with terse instructions. Handle this immediately. I want answers by end of day. The email came from the Defense Contract Audit Agency, informing Bill Hart Industries of a compliance review focusing specifically on intellectual property ownership verification for all technology deployed under federal contracts exceeding $500 million. They requested comprehensive documentation within 14 days. The word routine appeared 3 times in the notification. But Bill wasn't foolish. Government audits were rarely random, especially ones this precisely targeted and impeccably timed. He spent the rest of breakfast on his phone, his voice growing increasingly agitated with each call to attorneys and compliance officers. From across our kitchen table, I watched him spiral, his carefully constructed confidence cracking under unexpected pressure. They're saying this could delay contract deployment, he told me later while pacing our living room, phone pressed to his ear. Potentially months of delays. The investors are going to panic when this becomes public knowledge. I'm sure everything will be fine, I soothed, playing my supportive role flawlessly. You said all the documentation was properly filed. He stopped pacing and looked at me then, really looked. As if trying to read something hidden in my expression, searching for any sign of knowledge or complicity. But he saw only concern, only support, only the face I'd perfected over 6 years of invisibility. Yeah, he said slowly, doubt creeping into his voice despite his words. Everything's fine. This is probably just standard government incompetence and overcomplicated bureaucracy. But his eyes betrayed the first genuine flicker of fear I'd ever seen there. Ava's text message arrived late on a Friday night. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. Just the 2 of us. It's important. I met her at a small cafe near her apartment in Pacific Heights, curious about what Bill's mistress wanted from me. She looked exhausted, stressed, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges. The audit, she said without preamble, stirring her untouched coffee nervously. Bill's completely falling apart. He's convinced someone inside the company triggered the investigation deliberately. He's interrogating everyone, making accusations, threatening people's jobs. He's creating enemies everywhere he turns. She leaned forward, studying my face with sharp intelligence. Did you do this? I met her eyes with calm steadiness. Why would you assume that? Because you're smarter than everyone gives you credit for. Including Bill. Ava took a sip of coffee, her hands not quite steady. I know about Miami. Nora told me you know about us, about his plans for the investor retreat. And yet here you are, I observed mildly, still planning to accept his public proposal. Here I am, she agreed, realizing that Bill Hart might not be the prize I thought I was winning. This audit is revealing things, financial irregularities, IP documentation gaps, inconsistencies his legal team can't explain. She paused significantly. If this company collapses, it destroys my career along with everyone else's. Then perhaps you should consider distancing yourself strategically, I suggested. She pulled out her phone, showing me text messages from Bill. Angry, desperate messages blaming everyone around him, threatening consequences, spiraling into paranoia and rage. This is the man who was planning to propose to me in Miami. This is who he really becomes when things go wrong. I stood to leave, gathering my bag. Whatever you decide, Ava, remember that you always have choices. We all do. As I walked toward the cafe door, I heard her whisper behind me, you have no idea what you've started. I paused, glancing back with a small smile. Actually, I do. Bill's public proposal to Ava happened exactly as Nora had warned, but with a desperate edge that transformed the spectacle into something almost pathetic. The Miami investor retreat became his stage for a grand gesture designed to project strength while everything crumbled around him. I've realized that life is too short for uncertainty and hesitation, Bill announced to the gathered crowd of investors and industry leaders, Ava standing beside him in a white dress I recognized from her Instagram posts. Sophia and I have parted ways amicably. We discovered we wanted different futures. But I've found someone who truly matches my ambition, my vision, my relentless drive for innovation. The engagement ring was enormous, ostentatious, clearly expensive, a statement piece designed for cameras and social media. Ava accepted it with a kiss that photographers captured from every conceivable angle. The investors applauded politely, but I could see the skeptical glances, the whispered conversations happening at the periphery. Nora sent me real-time updates and photos. "He's trying desperately to control the narrative," her text read. "Attempting to paint himself as decisive and strong while the audit investigation swirls around him. But it's not working. Everyone's talking about the IP problems, not the engagement." I studied the photos of Bill and Ava, all performative smiles for the cameras. But I recognized the tension in his jaw, the strain around his eyes, the subtle desperation in his body language. This wasn't celebration. This was a drowning man grasping frantically at any available lifeline. The media coverage split predictably between the engagement announcement and growing speculation about Bill Hart Industries' deepening legal troubles. Someone, not me directly, but a journalist I'd carefully provided information to, had leaked details about the ongoing audit. Bill's perfect PR moment collapsed under the weight of larger, more damaging questions about his company's fundamental integrity. The leak hit every major technology publication simultaneously on Tuesday morning. Defense contractor under federal investigation for potential intellectual property theft. The articles were meticulously researched, professionally reported, and absolutely devastating. They detailed concerns about the algorithm powering Bill's $600 million government contract, raised pointed questions about its origins and development timeline, and included anonymous quotes from industry insiders suggesting the technology might have been developed by uncredited personnel with expertise Bill demonstrably lacked. The most damaging element was a detailed sidebar analysis comparing code samples from my publicly archived Stanford doctoral thesis. Available in the university's digital repository, with excerpts from Bill's patent application. The similarities weren't just notable, they were undeniable, unmistakable, damning. The algorithm's original developer appears to be Dr. Sophia Lin, the lead article stated with careful journalistic precision, a software engineer who worked closely with Hart Industries during its formative years. Multiple attempts to reach Dr. Lin for comment were unsuccessful. I hadn't responded to the journalist's interview requests because my attorneys had strongly advised strategic silence. Let the evidence speak first. Let the questions accumulate and multiply. Let Bill scramble to explain what he fundamentally couldn't. By noon, my email inbox overflowed with interview requests from every major publication. My phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, industry analysts, even former colleagues. But I remained strategically invisible, letting the mystery of my silence add weight and credibility to the mounting accusations. Bill released a statement through his increasingly frantic PR team. All intellectual property was developed in-house and properly attributed. We're completely confident the audit will confirm this. But confidence was precisely what his carefully worded statement lacked. Every word sounded defensive, hollow, desperate, transparently false. The government's decision arrived on Friday afternoon, delivered in formal bureaucratic language that barely concealed its devastating severity. Contract deployment suspended pending complete resolution of intellectual property ownership questions and verification of authorship claims. $600 million frozen indefinitely. All deployment halted immediately. Investors panicking across every communication channel. I watched Bill's company stock price collapse in real time on my laptop, the numbers cascading downward in an accelerating red blur. By market close, Bill Hart Industries had lost 43% of its total valuation. By Monday morning's opening bell, it would lose significantly more. Liam called me that evening, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. The emergency board meeting was brutal. They demanded comprehensive answers. Bill couldn't provide anything credible. Every piece of documentation traces directly back to your original work, Sophia. The timestamp evidence alone is absolutely damning. What's the board planning? I asked, though I already knew. Emergency session scheduled for Monday morning. They're going to demand his immediate resignation. He paused significantly. But this goes beyond just the contract suspension. The investigation has revealed financial irregularities, systematic misrepresentation to investors, potential fraud charges. Bill built his entire empire on stolen innovation and creative accounting. Nora's text arrived simultaneously, complete chaos. Investors threatening massive lawsuits. Ava returned the ring and won't take his calls. Bill's completely isolated now. I thought about Bill 6 years ago, charming, ambitious, full of promises about partnership and shared success. I thought about every late night I'd spent coding his dreams while mine withered. I thought about that gala where he'd publicly called me intellectually inferior while celebrating success built entirely on my stolen work. Now his empire, constructed on my plagiarized innovation, was collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance and theft. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It simply felt necessary, inevitable, right. The legal summons arrived at Bill's office Monday morning via professional courier, delivered just hours before his scheduled emergency board meeting. Liam sent me a photo, Bill's face completely drained of color as he read the formal notification. Intellectual property infringement claim, Dr. Sophia Lynn vs. Bill Hart Industries. My attorneys had filed in federal court, seeking injunctive relief, substantial damages, and formal legal recognition of my authorship. The filing was 217 pages of meticulously documented evidence, supported by expert testimony from Dr. Rivera and corroborated by 7 years of time-stamped proof. The code comparison analysis was definitive and irrefutable. My original doctoral thesis work, publicly presented before I'd ever encountered Bill, matched his patent filing with 94% similarity. The remaining 6% represented minor optimizations that I could prove, through documented email conversations, I'd personally suggested to him. Bill's attorneys requested an immediate emergency meeting. My legal team responded with professional coldness. All communication must proceed through formal discovery channels established by the court. That afternoon, Bill tried calling me directly. 16 increasingly desperate attempts. I blocked his number after listening to the third voicemail, where his voice shifted erratically from anger to desperation to something that might have been genuine grief. Sophia, please. We can work this out somehow. Whatever you think happened, I can explain everything. We built this company together. You can't just destroy it all. Please call me back. But we hadn't built anything together. He'd constructed his reputation on my stolen foundation, then systematically tried to erase me completely from the narrative. Now I was erasing him instead, one precisely filed legal document at a time, using the same methodical approach I'd once applied to writing the code he'd stolen. The boardroom confrontation lasted 3 brutal hours. Liam had invited me to attend, to face Bill directly, but I declined. I didn't need to be physically present. The documentary evidence spoke with unimpeachable authority. Liam called me afterward, describing the scene with grim professional satisfaction. We presented everything. Your time-stamped code repositories going back 7 years. Dr. Rivera's expert testimony establishing prior authorship. The Stanford University archives. The emails where Bill explicitly discussed how to file the patent without crediting you. How did he respond? I asked. He tried arguing that you'd worked under his direction, that standard employer-employee relationships gave him derivative rights to your work. Liam's voice hardened with anger. I presented your actual employment contract, the one specifically stating you were an independent consultant, not an employee. The contract that explicitly reserved all your intellectual property rights. The contract his own attorneys drafted and he personally signed. There was a pause filled with the weight of institutional judgment. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO, effective immediately. Security escorted him from the building 45 minutes ago. It's over, Sophia. I stood at my apartment window, looking out at San Francisco's glittering skyline. The city where I'd once abandoned my own startup dreams to support Bill's ambitions. What happens to the company now? That depends partly on you, Liam said carefully. The board wants to negotiate a settlement. Full public recognition of your authorship, substantial financial damages, and, they specifically asked me to mention this, they want to offer you the Chief Technology Officer position. Let you rebuild the technical division under your direct leadership with full authority and equity. Bill's company, now mine to reshape or destroy as I chose. Tell them I'll consider their proposal, I replied. After my lawsuit reaches its complete legal resolution. The headlines exploded across every major publication. Tech CEO accused of stealing Fiancé's groundbreaking work, defense contract collapses amid intellectual property theft allegations, $600 million deal evaporates after algorithm authorship dispute revealed. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Interview requests flooded in from 60 Minutes, TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, NPR. Speaking invitations arrived from women in technology organizations nationwide. Messages of support poured in from colleagues I hadn't contacted in years. I declined everything. My attorney strongly advised careful public silence, but beyond legal strategy, I didn't want to become a media spectacle. This wasn't about fame or public sympathy. It was about correction. Setting the record straight through proper legal channels, not through performative interviews. But the court of public opinion rendered its own verdict regardless of my silence. Social media meticulously dissected every aspect of Bill's career, revealing patterns I hadn't fully recognized myself. Other former employees came forward with their own stories of stolen credit and misappropriated work. Previous business partners detailed similar betrayals and systematic exploitation. Bill's carefully constructed image as an innovative technical genius completely collapsed. What emerged instead was an unflattering portrait of someone who'd built an empire by systematically exploiting others' talents and expertise, particularly targeting and stealing from talented women. Ava released a carefully worded statement distancing herself. I had no knowledge of any IP irregularities or misappropriations. Former investors filed breach of fiduciary duty lawsuits. Corporate sponsors withdrew their backing and support. The company Bill had valued at $1.2 billion just 1 month earlier was now worth a fraction of that, its entire future dependent on my willingness to save it. And Bill himself had completely vanished from public view, his social media silent, his office permanently empty, his reputation destroyed. The knock on my apartment door came late Thursday evening. I checked the security camera and felt my breath catch unexpectedly. Bill stood in the hallway, looking disheveled in ways I'd never witnessed. His hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled and stained, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and defeat. I considered not answering. My attorneys would certainly advise against any direct contact. But something made me open the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Sophia. My name came out broken, cracked. Please. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against every bit of professional legal advice, I unhooked the chain and let him inside. He stood in my living room, the modest apartment I'd rented after moving out of our shared penthouse, looking completely lost among my sparse furniture and half-unpacked boxes. Withdraw the lawsuit, he said without any preamble. Please. It'll completely ruin me. I've already lost the company, the contract, my reputation, everything. If this goes all the way through court, I'll lose everything that remains. You were planning to publicly propose to Ava at the same event where you'd humiliate me, I replied quietly. You called me intellectually inferior. You stole my life's work. You systematically planned to erase me completely from everything we'd supposedly built together. I know. He collapsed onto my couch, head buried in his hands. I know what I did. And I'm genuinely sorry. I got completely caught up in the success, the public image, the desperate need to be seen as the genius behind everything. But Sophia, you're going to completely destroy me. I looked at this man I'd loved for 6 years, now utterly broken before me, and felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no vindication. just bone-deep weariness. You destroyed yourself when you called me stupid, I said softly. You destroyed everything when you stole my work and planned my public humiliation. I'm just making sure everyone knows the complete truth. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more bureaucratic than dramatic. But the proceedings themselves were absolutely devastating in their methodical precision. My attorney, Margaret Chen, presented our case with surgical efficiency. Exhibit A, my Stanford doctoral thesis presentation from 7 years ago, clearly demonstrating the algorithm's complete core architecture, dated definitively before I'd ever met Bill Hart. Exhibit B. Timestamped email exchanges where I'd patiently explained complex technical concepts to Bill, including the specific optimizations he now claimed as his own innovations. Exhibit C. Dr. Rivera's comprehensive expert testimony, establishing beyond any doubt that my algorithm represented genuinely original research completed entirely before my involvement with Bill's company. Exhibit D. The irrefutable smoking gun. Bill's own emails to his patent attorney, explicitly discussing strategies to file my work without proper attribution or credit. Bill's attorneys attempted to argue I'd been effectively employed by his company, making my work constitute corporate intellectual property. Margaret calmly produced my independent contractor agreement, the document explicitly reserving all my IP rights, personally signed by Bill himself. They argued the algorithm had been significantly modified, making it legally transformative work. Dr. Rivera's detailed technical analysis demonstrated the modifications represented less than 6% of the original architecture, well below any threshold for derivative authorship claims. They argued I'd unreasonably delayed filing claims, suggesting implicit acceptance. Margaret systematically presented evidence of my continuous private objections, my repeated attempts to negotiate proper credit that Bill had consistently dismissed. When the judge asked Bill directly whether he'd developed the algorithm independently, I watched him struggle visibly with his answer. The truth would destroy him. But perjury would be infinitely worse. I built upon Dr. Lin's earlier foundational work, he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. The courtroom collectively gasped. It was over. The judgment arrived 30 days later, complete algorithm ownership awarded to Dr. Sophia Lin. Comprehensive injunctive relief granted, permanently prohibiting Bill Hart Industries from using the technology without explicit licensing. Damages awarded, $47 million, representing all profits derived from my stolen intellectual property. But more valuable than any monetary compensation was what followed immediately. The government reinstated the defense contract, this time awarded to my newly established company, Lin Technologies. I hired back every talented employee Bill had systematically mistreated, every engineer whose contributions he'd minimized or stolen outright. Nora joined as Vice President of Communications. Liam came aboard as Chief Financial Officer, bringing the rigorous ethical oversight Bill's company had always lacked. Dr. Rivera joined as Chief Scientific Advisor, lending his reputation and expertise. We rebuilt everything Bill had systematically corrupted. Not just the technology and products, but the entire organizational culture. Every contribution was properly credited and celebrated. Every employee received meaningful equity ownership. Every innovation was transparently, honestly attributed to its actual creators. Within 6 months, Lin Technologies had secured 2 additional major government contracts based on systematic improvements to my original algorithm, improvements developed collaboratively, transparently, ethically, with every single team member receiving appropriate recognition and compensation. Bill's company declared bankruptcy 3 months after the final judgment. All remaining assets were liquidated, the brand completely dissolved. His investors lost millions. His professional reputation never recovered from the comprehensive exposure of his systematic theft. I received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at Stanford's Technology Innovation Conference, the same venue where I'd first presented my thesis research years ago. This time, my name appeared on the program as founder and CEO, not as an invisible graduate student. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about correction, restoration, rebuilding something genuinely better from the ashes of betrayal. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, a single page of Bill's distinctive handwriting. Sophia, I'm filing for bankruptcy protection. My attorneys say I'll lose the penthouse, the cars, everything. Ava won't return any of my calls. My family barely acknowledges my existence. I'm starting over at 38 with nothing but overwhelming debt and a completely ruined reputation. I wanted you to know I finally understand what I actually destroyed. Not just the company or the contract, but us. The genuine partnership we could have built together. I'm truly sorry. It doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. B. I read it twice, then fed it deliberately through my office shredder. Not from cruelty or vindictiveness, but from finality and closure. That chapter had permanently closed. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Lynn Technologies' major product launch event started in 1 hour. Our revolutionary new distributed processing system, built on my original algorithm but enhanced through genuine team collaboration, was being unveiled to industry leaders, potential investors, and national press. I stood in my corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco's skyline, my name prominently displayed on the door, my vision actively guiding the company's direction, and prepared my keynote remarks. When I took the stage that evening before hundreds of attendees, I raised my glass for the opening toast. The room quieted expectantly, waiting. To everyone here tonight who's ever had their work stolen, their contributions systematically minimized, their intelligence publicly questioned or dismissed, I began, my voice clear, strong, unwavering. Always remember this fundamental truth: some people mistake silence for weakness. Some people confuse patience with acceptance. But silence is simply the sound of strategy being carefully, methodically prepared. The room erupted in sustained applause. Camera flashes illuminated the space. I caught Nora's proud smile, Liam's approving nod, Dr. Rivera's satisfied expression of vindication. I had started this journey 6 years ago as Bill's invisible partner, my contributions systematically erased. I ended it as myself, finally seen, properly credited, completely free, wholly vindicated. Not revenge. Restoration. Not destruction. Justice. Not bitterness. Liberation. The empire I'd unknowingly built for someone else, I'd now rebuilt for myself. And this time everyone knew exactly whose work made it possible.